Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights, conversation with Josh Luber about his Blindboxification of Everything book, 138 pages. First, thanks sponsors, Topps, Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. Thanks, Josh and Jesse Einhorn, your collaborator, February 3rd of 2026. I think it's available online. Very enjoyable, but a long read. I went through it all, asked him a lot of questions, and we had a long conversation broken into 3 parts. So it'll be coming, and I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I did. Thanks, Josh, and here it is. Again, the transparency that people are always complaining about, the more transparency you get, the more that is obvious. So a little bit of mystery, I think, is still okay.
Yeah.
We talked about the hybrid wax. They're already doing it. I also think that's maybe partly what Panini might have meant when they let it slip, that, or found in their PowerPoints that they were not going to be as damaged by not having the full license, as they would still be able to be successful and to do well. I don't wish anybody ill, because I've got friends at every company, but like I said, they cannot do business as usual. And some of your ideas, they need to take them to heart. Okay, page 22. Griffey had a mystique. What I wanted to get at there that I thought could be further developed is the Griffey took off because of his personal charisma, his legacy, and it had nothing to do with grading for a few years. Now, he was a condition-sensitive card, but there were factory sets, lots of factory sets, maybe even extra production there.
Right.
Maybe. But at any rate, this is all before grading. And so you get into the grading thing. Grading, it didn't come into the early 90s. Page 23 is your first mention of prediction markets. And Josh, I'm here to tell you, I think that's your next book. Your next original book is going to be prediction markets. It's going to be in a year or two. And what's going to be happening is going to start out chaotic, and then it's going to move into manipulated, and then it's going to get either regulated or something's going to be worked out. But if we're really living in a digital world where everything is gamblified, and they can even get away with not calling it gambling, that it's like a commodity, these kind of like prop bets, I think that's your next book, to deep dive into that. The other thing is on these prediction markets, and it's like when I started doing the price guides, I mean, I didn't disclose anything to anybody, but my sources that I had, the very veteran, biggest dealers, they had inside knowledge. They didn't control the market, but they were a big part of the market. And with prediction markets now, in most of them, it's okay to have insider knowledge.
Yeah.
It's hard to separate that out. Now, if you're the person, you can't put bets on yourself. And if it's your friend or friend of a friend or 6 degrees of separation, what they say is just watch the movement of the market and see. It's buyer beware and seller beware.
That's right. The definition of insider trading in prediction markets is got to be one of the biggest hot button issues, right? The Super Bowl guy that bet on whether there would be a streaker, and then he went and streaked, and right, like, was that inside info? Clearly, but also, was that okay? I don't know. When you have these real life events that you can bet on anything that happens, just by nature of being humans, we're out there controlling those events.
Like I said, it's buyer beware and seller beware. But there are so many ways, if this prediction market, and Fanatics is getting into it probably pretty deep. So you're talking about positions that could be straddles or hedges against price movements or other things that happen that are not fully controllable, but you have an edge.
That's right.
Some people have an edge. Right. Okay. So put that on your to-do list when you get some free time. That's going to be fascinating.
We intentionally just graze the surface of prediction markets, because once you start down that path,
it's a whole book, Josh, and it'll unfold in the next 6 months. Okay, page 26. What does it say about our industry that many of the people in it are only known by pseudonyms, by handles? You know, there's Card Porn, there's Cage Lawyer, there's Chris Hoge. Now, I know the real names of those people. They are real people. But for whatever reason, they have a right to choose a handle. But when that's more known, there's just something to that. That's something.
But probably less in our industry than most because of the amount of true social media influencer type people in our space is relatively small, and it's pretty hard to operate and buy and sell cards. So it's smaller than most. And I thought Cage was like this perfect example. And I'm a huge fan. So yeah.
But he has physicality. He's out there.
That's right.
He's got a megaphone, but he's there in real life too. So I think that's the safeguard. And that's where card porn got in trouble.
For sure.
Persona that was mysterious.
That's right.
Okay. The inaccessible cards you're talking about, the truly collectible cards. I've been saying that for a long time. And when people say, what are you looking for? I say, I'm looking for the cards that aren't for sale.
Yeah.
Somebody doesn't want to sell it. That's what I'm interested in. If they do want to sell it, I'm thinking, why do you want to sell it? So I totally agree with that concept. And I think TCC is a contribution to the vernacular of the hobby.
As a market guy, for a long time, I thought the cards that had enough liquidity would be the cards that drove the future of the industry, let's say. Not that the inaccessible ones and rare ones wouldn't be valuable and coveted, but take a look at LeBron Topps Chrome, 2003 PSA 10. There's 3,000 copies or something, right? Like having enough liquidity to have a true market value in most markets is a necessary function, right? We don't have enough people in the hobby yet to make that happen. But I do think the TCCs will become completely inaccessible and they'll get locked up and they'll never trade hands or they'll be so expensive. And I think the next generation, and generation may be a loose word, maybe it's 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. But like that group of cards that have enough liquidity to have a true market value, but still relatively small. 3,000 is a small number of cards compared to millions of people coming in. That's where we all made our mistakes in 21, right? That card is the bellwether card for like whatever it was, $15,000, and now it's back down to $4,000. But I still think in the future, as the market becomes more of a true market, that'll be the interesting thing to look at. But the TCCs and the super rare stuff, it's already inaccessible for most people.
Okay. You start out saying never, and now you're saying almost. Okay. Never is too strong a word.
That's right.
Because what this hobby lives on and your Blindboxification is all about. So Josh, you're saying there's a chance. And for these TCCs, you're saying there's a chance. It may not be there, but if it is there, I'm going to pounce on it. And to me, that is truly a holy grail. Holy grail, I'll do another episode about what is an iconic card. But an iconic card, really to be iconic, it kind of needs to be in an iconic set. And in most cases, it's the card in that set you'd rather have than all the rest of the set. In fact, for 52 Topps Mantle, if you have a set of 407 cards, you'd rather have that. And I was faced with that choice back in 1977. I bought with another guy a complete set on a buying trip, 407 cards. He said, look, dude, I only want the Mantle. You can have the other 406. And I said, I don't want to do that. And he said, please, pretty please. And I said, okay. So I got the 406 cards and he got the one. And so we're still friends. He still speaks to me. And it wasn't a horrible deal, but I'm just saying, Honus Wagner, when you talk about what's the best gum card, what's the best Topps card, immediately it's Mickey Mantle. Okay. If you talk about what's the best T206 or any T card, it's Honus Wagner. If you had a complete set without the Wagner or the Wagner, you'd say, give me the Wagner. And so to me, that's what iconic is.
Yeah.
But that definition can change. And those are the two cards you've singled out, and I think they're excellent choices. Okay, page 35, you got into, the hits in the old days were the high numbers. The really old days, they were the high numbers. And not even as much superstars. Then as we got into the 70s, the hits became high number superstars or superstars that were shorter printed by virtue of higher series or whatever. So I didn't think there was an accurate representation of the consternation the collectors had in the 70s of trying to complete their sets with everybody having the same things of, I need these high numbers in all these different years up through 1972. There were almost always high numbers that were different. And so those were the chase cards. Those were the hits. If you opened up a pack, in fact, the series sometimes was more important than the player.
Right.
That's hard to imagine, but in the 60s and early 70s, it flipped in the early 70s to where the player became very important.
Do you have a sense of the difference in supply between high numbers and low numbers back then?
Yes.
like relative, like percentage?
Yeah. I mean, it's all speculation, but
I'm curious because there's a difference. The whole reason we spend all the time on Wagner and Mantle is because obviously they are what they are. But if you trace it back to the story and the history, it's like, okay, why are these as special? And they've grown and you've had 70 years of compounding story. So sure, the high numbers were the more desired ones because they were short print, but like
there weren't enough to go around.
but
I
do we even know
completely
today what the percentage is? Like
Yes.
that were actually
We don't know exactly, but there's ranges. I'm going to do a big, long episode, probably by myself, just to rein it in on
Yeah.
52 tops. And
Yeah.
I'll have a lot
But
of
like-
series in that. But it wasn't a drop off every series. But with 52 tops, the fifth series, the Maze series, was a significant drop off, maybe 50% from the first four series. Then my thesis is that the 52 tops, I'm previewing what I'm going to say, and I'll give some more justification to it, is 1/3 or 1/4 of the fifth series. The Mantle is the double print. That throws you off. But if you look at the rest of them and consider some other factors I bring in mathematically, but anyway, those were the hits.
Sure.
You have a footnote on page 38, 21, that if there'd be a person at the show and they'd say, how do we know there could only be 15 Mantles? And I was just saying, I was there at those shows and I was one of the guys that could easily have named off 100 just looking around the room, and the collectors I knew well had seen their collections. My point, Josh, is that when the hobby was smaller, the guys got together at the hospitality rooms and at the shows, and it was a smaller fraternity where you shared knowledge. And I was a sponge in the 70s, and I was hearing, and you formed some impressions, not fully mathematically, but proportionality to where this is tougher than this, and we know about this, and kind of interpolating and extrapolating. And those guys, they really shared information with me because I was this young kid that had a PhD that wanted to bring some order to the hobby, and they trusted me to do that. And so I'm not 100% right, but I'm mostly right.
I 100% agree, and I acknowledge your position there, but let me push back and say, in 1991, I was a 13-year-old walking around card shows. All I had was what the guy in front of me is telling me. When my father sitting next to me was not a card collector trying to manage, this guy's not ripping off this 13-year-old kid. And I'm not buying 52 tops Mantles when I was 13, right? But all I have to go on is what this guy is telling me here. Today, every 13-year-old in the world has infinite, look at Card Ladder and PSA Pop Report and has access to every piece of data ever. And so that's really the larger sort of macro point in there. But I'm with you. The professionals that were in the space back then had that info.
I hope I can say this right, but if you go back to the early 70s, the mid 70s, when it wasn't the wild, wild west, because it wasn't criminal behavior, but there was hyperbole. There was showing your own stuff the best advantage, maybe getting the better of the person you're selling to, but not so much that it was criminal or outrageous to where you create an enemy for life. And so we knew, and when I started the magazines and hired my buddies to go around the country, we knew who the dealers were that took some advantage of the situation and could price a little higher. And over time, they get exposed, Josh.
Yeah.
But there wasn't as much knowledge then. That's one of the reasons I did my magazines and books and price guides is to
that's right.
Yeah.
I should say that's all we had, right? We had Beckett in our hand.
That was a starting point. It wasn't necessarily the be all end all, but it was a starting point. Okay, up to page 40. Honus Wagner was the GOAT in 1908.
That's right.
Okay? Before the set was put out, he was the man. In 1909, you could make a case that he was the co-GOAT with Ty Cobb. But in 1908, Honus Wagner had maximum, not pricing power or market power, but if he said, hey, I don't want to be in this, he was an important guy. I don't know that they even printed them all or it was pulled early, but there are very few out there. And the Mystique was born not because he didn't like tobacco, but that the card was an extreme short print in an iconic set. And from early, even in the late 60s, there were buy offers, and Burdick himself, all the great collectors of the 30s and 40s, it was the card of a sports card. My point is that Wagner had a Mystique way before any Wagner got graded, way before PSA came along. And PSA, by the way, was not an upstart in 91. They were an upstart in 86 when they started doing coins. and they did coins, and they were strong enough in coins pretty quickly to be able to fund jumping off into sports cards, which was a little bit speculative. They were a little bit ahead of the curve. There was another guy doing some grading and slabbing, but they were not absolutely first, but they were successful because they were trusted more because they'd already had an established, was it PCGS? They had their own coin thing going that had a fair amount of respect. That these guys are dealing with coins, which are 10 times more valuable than cards at that point. So I don't think they were untested, but they had not established their, I won't say methodology, but I know from starting up BGS, there's so many forks in the road. How are you going to treat this or that? You know, the centering, the surface, the corners, the edges, the hand cutting, which in some sets or products, that's mainly what you see. Are you going to disallow those? Are those all going to get authentic? I think they were presented with an opportunity, just like we could talk about with Cyberg, to make a marketing and mythological splash. As kind of your word, that they were building a myth there. It wasn't a lie as much as it was a story. It was a marketing thrust that had some pizzazz to it. And the Wagner was not a fraudulent card. At best, it's overgraded, Josh.
Yeah.
At best, it's overgraded. It's a legit card. And there are many cards that when they are hand trimmed at a later date, but still measure up, the grading companies have great difficulty in saying, am I going to not accept this? There's nothing wrong with it. They can look at it with black light and see if they can tell, then that's one thing. But some of these, you just can't tell. Clearly, it was cut at a later date, and it's been admitted.
Right. Of course, I'm creating hyperbole.
Okay.